let's start from here. We're going to go back to, I think this is where we started last time. So let's just read through it. And there were some parts toward the end that I want to clear up a little bit. So the Gemara here says, Asur b'achila, quoting from the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is talking about, of course, the things that one is not permitted to do on Yom Kippur, and one of them is you're not allowed to eat. And the Gemara says, Hani chamisha inuyim keneged mi. So these chamisha inuyim, these 5 afflictions that are mentioned in the Mishnah, what are they in correspondence to? So Amar Rav Chisda keneged chamisha inuyim shebatorah. They're in correspondence to the 5 inuyim in the Torah, meaning the 5 places where that you have to afflict your soul on Yom Kippur from these different places, from Uvasor, Ach Besor, Shabbat Shabbaton, and Vaitalachem. Right, so we're familiar with those. That's fine. But then the Gemara says, Hani chamisha hovu. So these are 5 anan shita tanan. So we have 5 psukim, and which indicate 5 inuyim. That is based on the question and the answers. The question is, what are these 5 inuyim in correspondence to? Rav Chisda said they're in correspondence to these 5 psukim. So the Gemara relates then, says, okay, so these are 5, but the Mishnah lists 6. So how do we account for the 6th inui? So the Gemara says, Shtiya b'cha achilahi. Drinking is included in eating. So really, Shtiya and Achila are 1 inui. And how do I know that? How do I know that Shtiya is included in Achila? So when the Torah talks about Maaser Sheni and that you have to eat Maaser Sheni in Yerushalayim, it says that V'achalta, that you have to eat, and then it lists among the things you have to eat, Tirosh. So if you have to eat Tirosh, so Tirosh we understand, Gemara says Tirosh Chamra, Tirosh is wine, the Karile, and we read about it, V'achalta, right? It's described as Achila. So that tells me that that drinking is included in the act of eating. So if you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, so Mimela, I understand that means you're not allowed to drink as well. And then the Gemara challenged that. It says, Mimai, for what? In other words, what for why would I assume that to be the case? The dilma da'achle al yedei anigron. That is, why would I assume when the Torah tells me the dinim of maaser sheni, and it says that I have to eat wine in Yerushalayim, maybe it means that I actually literally have to eat it, and that is, I'll eat it by eating anigron, which is this wine and fish sauce. Dama Rabba Bar Shmuel Anigron Maya de Silka. That Rabba Bar Shmuel tells us that Anigron is literally water of. Rashi explains Silka here means spinach. It's like the word selek. In other words, it refers to a vegetable, right? So in other words, it's water that you get from boiling a vegetable. And achsigron maya dekulhu shalki, or shlaki, right? It's water of any heavily boiled vegetable. And this line of Rabba Bar Shmuel, what's interesting is you would think that the Gemara here would have brought something that showed explicitly that anigron and achsigron are made with wine. And it doesn't, but it seems to refer. So, in other words, Rashi fills that out for us, right? So he says, "Anigron is min ma'achal shenotnin bo yain." It's a kind of food that we put wine into. The kamot shenim tosefta anigron achsigron shenotnin bo yain b'shemen. We learn many times in the Tosefta about anigron and achsigron that those are things that we put in wine and oil, respectively. So, why the Gemara brings Rabba bar Shmuel, it's not immediately clear, right? In other words, he tells us that anigron, he's talking about anigron, meaning anigron is something that seems to be based on boiled spinach, and achsigron is based on boiled vegetables of other types. That's fine, but it doesn't tell me that I have it with wine. So I don't know, and I didn't look into this, but it seemed to me that maybe the statement of Rabba bar Shmuel was something that was known, and it was actually connected to something like a longer description of anigron that maybe gave more of the recipe, which would have included wine. In any event, the question though still stands that maybe when the Torah says v'achalta tirosh, that you eat tirosh, maybe it meant that the mitzvah of eating tirosh in Yerushalayim would be literally to eat it. That would be the mitzvah. And therefore, achila only teaches me achila as I know it, which is I have to consume it as a food and not as a drink. So a little bit further on in the parsha there, it tells me about Pidyon Maaser Sheni, that if you can't bring the actual food to Yerushalayim, then you can redeem it against money, and then bring the money to Yerushalayim to buy food to eat there. So how does it say? V'natata kesef b'chol asher taveh nafshecha b'bakar v'tzon v'yayin v'shechar. So it says shechar in the girsa that I brought here is the girsa of the Bach. Shechar v'yayin shtiyahu. Well, here's Paul. Shechar and yayin are drink, and karyeh rachmana v'chalta. So, as we mentioned last time, so what's the difference between this and the first pasuk? What's the advantage of this pasuk in telling me that drinking is included in eating?
There's two types of drinking, two beverages.
It's two beverages. So it seems, to say it a little differently, which I think you said last time, this pasuk includes shechar. So shechar, the yayin part, presumably I got that from the pasuk of Tirosh, the earlier pasuk. Hi, Paul, we're just doing a bit of review.
Okay.
So presumably I got that from the first pasuk. So, but here it adds in shechar, so that when you do Pidyon Maaser Sheni, and you go to Yerushalayim with your money, and you buy things to eat. So now it says that you can buy wine and shechar. Shechar v'yayin shtiyahi v'kayeh rachmana v'yachalta. The Torah calls it v'yachalta, right? Because that's also in the pasuk. The whole pasuk here says, "V'natata kesef l'chol asher taveh nafshecha b'bakar v'tzon v'yayin v'shechar." Here it also says v'achalta. So it said v'achalta earlier when you bring the actual maaser sheni to Yerushalayim, and it also says v'achalta when you bring the pidyon maaser sheni to Yerushalayim. So now I have v'achalta referring to both yayin and to shechar. The karyer rachmana v'achalta, and the Torah calls it eating. So again, I challenged it. Mimai v'dilma hachanami dachlei nigron. So I could say the same thing as I said before. Maybe it just means that I'm going to eat the wine and the shechar mixed in with something else, mixed in with a nigron. They're mixed into a food. Now they're just a component of food. And the reason the Torah uses the word v'achalta is because it's only referring to food that you consume by eating, and it's not at all referring to drinking. So here, as we said a moment ago, so here we have this the difference with the word shechar katan. But here in the second pasuk, the Torah says shechar. So what's shechar? Midi de mishaker. That's something that makes you drunk, something that can make you drunk. So, and Rashi says, "Midi mishakerim shichrut derech achila." We don't get the way of getting drunk is only through is not through eating. It's only through drinking. So then the Gemara challenges that and says, no, maybe you can also get drunk through eating. Maybe it's maybe like something shechar, which is midi de mishaker, it's something that makes you drunk. Maybe that's referring to something like dvela ki'ilit, the press dates that came from ki'ilah. Titania achal dvela ki'ilit v'shatat dvash v'chalav. If somebody ate from dvela ki'ilit, or they drank honey, which would be date honey, v'chalav, or they drank milk, v'nichnas mikdash, Rashi's goish chayav, right? It will be chayav mishum shechar al tesht. You're not allowed to drink something that's mishaker, so you're allowed to drink shechar. So what do we see from that? That it's possible, even with midi de mishaker, even if something that makes you drunk, it's possible to eat it. And so Hadja Kushin Leduchta, my kasha goes back to its original place, because I could say, even in this second instance of an Atata Kesef, and it mentions Yain v'Shechar, and then it says V'achalta, maybe it's still only referring to things that you actually eat. And if you ask me, wait, but shechar is included, and shechar is something that makes you drunk, so I'll say, yeah, you can also eat things that make you drunk. So I don't yet have a verse to prove that shtiyah is included in achilah. El yalif shechar minazir. So rather, I learn out shechar from the shechar of the Nazir. I learned shechar here by Maser Sheni from the shechar that's asur for the Nazir. Malahalan yain, afkan yain. Just like there by Nazir, shechar that it's referring to is wine. So here also it's wine. And so what did I gain by this? So Rashi says, with wine, you don't get drunk except by drinking it. So I think let's understand this a little bit a little bit more closely. So let's open the pasuk there. Perek Vav, pasuk Gimel. Actually, I was almost going to cancel because I don't have Wi-Fi, but I managed to hook up my phone to the computer so that we would have a connection. Okay, let's just make sure we understand this. So this is Parshat Nazir. Right, in Bamidbar Perek Vav. This is in Parshat Naso. דבר בני ישראל אמרת להם איש או אישה כי יפלי לנדור נדר nazir להזיר להשם. A man or a woman who makes a neder to be a nazir. Then what does that mean? Miyayin v'shechar yazir, chometz yayin v'chometz shechar lo yishten. They should separate themselves from wine and from shechar, and these other things as well, right? Wine vinegar and shechar vinegar, they shall not drink. V'chol mishrat anavim lo yishten. Any soaking of grapes should not, they shall not drink. They are not allowed to eat either moist or dry grapes. So, okay, so what do we see? Yayin, they have to not have, right? They're not allowed to consume. They have to separate themselves from wine and from shechar. So what is the Gemara trying to extract from this? We want to say we learn shechar minazir. I learned shechar, that is the shechar of Maaser Sheni. I'm learning that from the shechar of the nazir. Ma lahalan yayin afkan yayin. Just like there by nazir, the shechar that's being spoken about is yayin. So what do they mean that shechar is yayin? Because here I would say they're distinct, right? It's yayin and shechar. So what does it mean that yayin the shechar, that the shechar is wine?
It's only talking, it's specific to grape products, which implies wine.
So it's talking about, so what we see in the pasuk is that it's sort of wine as a category. So there's something that's called wine, but there's also like a bigger category of wine, which, like you're saying, includes essentially all these grape products. So it's saying that there's this relationship now that's established in the pasuk between wine and shechar. So the shechar in this context doesn't mean anything that will make you drunk. What it means is some wine product that will make you drunk. Something that's either wine itself or wine adjacent. So here we would, in this context, then I would understand shechar is some kind of a liquor that's based on wine. Just like the rest of the pasuk is talking about, like you said, it's talking about other things that you make with grapes, either vinegar, or even just soaked grapes, or even just eating grapes. So clearly this whole pasuk is talking about things that are specifically grapes. So it would not include, for example, whiskey or bourbon, right? A corn mash or a rye mash or something like that. That doesn't seem to be what the Torah is concerned about. What the Torah is concerned about is specifically shechar that's like wine, or that's based on wine, that's made from grapes. So once I say that, malahalan yain afkan yain. So just like the sheikhar that's referred to by the Nazir is talking about some kind of wine or wine product. So then I'll say that's what sheikhar means when the Torah is talking about Maser Sheni. And therefore what? Then I'll understand that the sheikhar that you are allowed that you're allowed to eat in Yerushalayim with your kesef Maser Sheni is wine. In other words, it is a drink. It's something that you actually drink because it has to be like wine. And as what Rashi's saying, it's wine. So what we said a moment ago, Dilma Dvela Ki'ilit, Zelo Kashur. That is the idea of saying that maybe anything that makes you shikor, like a Dvela Ki'ilit, that's true, but it's not what the pasuk is talking about. It's not what it's talking about in Maaser Sheni. It's not talking about anything that makes you shikor. It's talking specifically about wine that makes you shikor. And wine doesn't make you shikor unless you drink it. It doesn't make you shikor just by being a part of something else.
Can I ask a general question?
Sure.
Yes. There seem to be two arguments. One argument which is weaker and another one which is stronger. Why would the Gemara first bring the weak argument if it has a much stronger one?
That's it. Okay, so let's specify, right? So you're asking a methodological question.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So let's break it down. Which is the weaker argument? The argument that says
the preceding one, the Maser Sheni, the one which goes with the Achalta.
right. So in other words, we start from there. So to use a phrase, the Gemara, as it were, begins from the low-hanging fruit. That is, see there, I think it goes like this, and I think you see this often. I actually, before I answer this specifically, but I want to step back because what you're asking, I think, is a good general question, because, we have many instances in the Gemara where the Gemara asks a question, and it may go through many answers that it then knocks away until it gets to the final one. So why don't we just skip to the final answer?
Yes, that's what the question is.
Right? No, but it's basically, that's your question, right? And so we can look at it here specifically. So I think there's a couple of things.
Is it just for the pleasure of the argument, or maybe there were many arguments of different people, and they want to bring the argument of the different people just to be fair with them and not to forget them. So
first of all, that's also true, and also, so like when we're learning Gemara, so we're learning the culmination of hundreds of years of discussion. So we don't know exactly, especially in this particular Gemara, where we don't, where the Gemara here is stam. It's not telling.
There are no names of that.
Right. So it starts off with this ma'amar of Reish Lakish. Right? It says, Hani chamisha v'anan shita tanan shtia bicha achilahi. Right? So it says, no, shtiaz bicha achila. And I learned that from Reish Lakish. So it starts off with Reish Lakish. And Reish Lakish is the first one. He quotes the first pasuk in about Maaser Sheni, where you actually, so yes, so to begin with, we have historically, that is, in fact, that's presumably the earliest attributable tradition that we have that answers this question. We have a first generation Amorah who says, I learned it from this pasuk of Maaser Sheni. And I don't want to confuse, I want to stick to your question, but there's something here along the way that I also wanted to bring up. If I can remember, hold on a second. Oh, what's interesting about Bichlal, about this question, right? We have psukim, we have 5 psukim that each tell us vinitem or vita'anu on Yom Kippur. And that's the basis for the 5 inuyim. But the Mishnah lists 6. So the Gemara wants to know about, the Gemara presumably means that we really need 6 psukim and we only have 5. And we don't have it. We don't, uh-oh. Are we still connected?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
No, I see you and hear you.
Okay, no, I thought I lost the connection. Presumably, I need another pasuk. So we don't have another pasuk. So the Gemara says, oh, we don't need another pasuk because what's interesting to me about the question altogether is that there's an assumption here that
Are you recording?
what? Am I recording?
Yes, it seems, yes, in the upper corner, left
Yes.
corner, it's written.
Yeah,
You have mentioned that it's recording, yes.
Yeah, it's still recording.
Mhm.
And I'll edit out the couple of minutes. What's interesting is that there's an assumption of the question that Lashon HaMikra and Lashon Mishnah should be the same. That is, what's our problem? The Gemara wants to say, the reason I don't need a 6th pasuk from the Torah is because Shtiyah and Achila are the same. That is, when I use the term Achila, I assume that means Shtiyah as well, without expressing it explicitly. I don't have to say it explicitly. And the way Reish Lakish proves that is from a pasuk in the Torah. So so the Gemara also might have said the reason the Mishnah I'll put it, how should I articulate this? The Mishnah lists 6 things, and the Mishnah lists 6 things, and so the assumption is that it's really only 5. What I'm trying to, and I had a better articulation of this in my head a moment ago. I can't think of it, but there's a contrast, maybe we'll put it that way, between Lashon HaMishnah and Lashon HaMikra. That is, the question is, when the Torah uses the term Achila, does that mean also Shtiyah? That's what Reish Lakish wants to say. So then the question is, though, but does that inform me about how the Mishnah uses those terms? So you might make an argument that not necessarily. And actually, this question that I'm raising, it's an old question. It's something comes up in the Gemara elsewhere, that sometimes the way that Mishnah uses a word is not precisely the same way that you would find it in Mikra. And just to step back a little bit from that as well, because look, Lashon HaMikra, we know Mikra is composed of many books that were written over hundreds of years, and even within the Mikra itself, meanings of words are not identical, right? They sometimes change. So there's an underlying assumption here about how Parshanut of the Mikra works, which is to begin with, that I can learn out the meaning of a word in one context from another context. So here, I shouldn't drift off on this too much, because here it's in the case that we have in front of us, it's somewhat limited and relatively easy to understand, because here all the psukim that I'm using are in the Torah itself. So Shechar, in the context of the Torah, it's reasonable for me to say, if I can demonstrate what Shechar means in one context, that's what it means in another context. That may or may not be true or as true if I bring from a pasuk, let's say in Mishlei, which is much later. But what am I saying? So
this is also relevant for us, because when we are reading it, we may also misinterpret the words, and the words at all levels, at the level of the Torah and of the Mishnah and of the Gemara. Here we see, for instance, they speak about Tirosh. Today, Tirosh is Mitzanavim, but
right.
Maybe it doesn't mean that it's Mitzanavim in the Gemara or in the Mishnah.
Right. In fact, we'll get to. I don't remember if we got all the way to the end of this part of the sugya, but we're going to see that even B'lashon Mikra, there are different understandings of what Tirosh means.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just pointing out that to begin with, the Gemara here is concerned with the meaning of the word achila, because I have this basic question. The basic question is, what's the basis from the Mikra to have 5 Inuyim? That's A. So we'll say, or to have any Inuyim. So let's say we get the Inuyim based on the idea that the Torah repeats this command of the Initim. So that then each one should be an Inui. We're going to set that to one side, because there also I'm asking more questions than I'm answering, but I'm going to try to tie it up and get back to your question. Because to begin with, I have a question with the way the Gemara starts off. That is, it says that these Inuyim are keneged the 5 psukim, Seder. That sounds fine, except that we know that in other contexts, I might say that I need one legufa. I need one just for the basic idea. And then the other ones can be ribuyim. The other ones can add in more than from the beginning, more than the initial assumption. So how do I understand that here? Here it just seems to be there's a one-to-one correspondence between each inui and each pasuk. So do you understand what I mean? There's a lot of times the Gemara says that I need one legufa. I need one just to tell me the isur itself, and then extra psukim will tell me more about the isur. It will come to include more cases. So the Gemara doesn't say this, but it could be that the Gemara assumes that, let's say, the first inui, which, however you count, whichever one you start from, that tells me the inui of achila, because we might argue that's the most basic one. And then the other 4 come to tell me rechitza sicha nilata sanda v'tashmisha mita. Yecholiyot. We touched on this in an earlier part of the sugya when we talked about we had many ribuyim just for achila, right? Just to include all the different things that both you're not allowed to eat and you're allowed to eat, or that you have to eat, and so forth. But bonagid, so hani chamisha inuyin keneged me. So we say it's keneged these 5 psukim, and then we say, but we learned 6. The Mishnah learns 6. So the assumption is that the Mishnah doesn't have a basis to list 6 inuyim. It only has a basis to list 5 Inuyim. And so we answer by saying, no, it has a basis to list just 5, but it will include all 6, because Shtiyah is going to be included in Achila. So we start so this was now more directly to Paul's question. So we start from this drasha of Reish Lakish about Maaser Sheni, that when you take Maaser Sheni, you're supposed to take that actual food up to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim. And one of the things that you eat is tirosh, and we know that tirosh is yain. That's what we get from Reish Lakish. So that seems to be a very clear answer to the question. But yes, apparently later on, people challenged it. In other words, when the Gemara says "Mimai v'dilma da'achle al yedei anigron," that seems to be a later question. Otherwise, it would have been so and so asked this kasha to Reish Lakish. But we don't actually see any discussion with Reish Lakish. So this came at a later time. Now, it could be that everything that we're going to say is, maybe these are all things that Reish Lakish took into account. We don't know. We don't have any more of his discussion. But the reason, presumably, I start from this first pasuk of Maaser Sheni is because that's where Reish Lakish began, and that's our earliest attribution. That's the earliest discussion we have. And also, I think it's reasonable to say that we start from this, let's say, the simplest and most obvious place. And this seems to be a very straightforward answer. It says v'achalta and it says tirosh. So, who would have thought otherwise? As I continue on, I see that I could make, I can make arguments against that. And I could say that the tirosh that it's talking about is only al yedei achila. And then I get in these kinds of sibuchim, right, about anigron, or maybe I'm eating it by, maybe I actually do eat it by anigron. And if that's true, then I don't have a basis from the Torah to say that shtiyah is bichlal achila. So I say, okay, I get it from the later part of Maaser Sheni, where you have Pidyon Maaser Sheni, and there includes the word shechar, and then we'll skip a little to what we just said. So, we say shechar, in the end, doesn't mean anything that makes you drunk. Shechar is a kind of wine itself, and wine doesn't make you drunk except by achila. So I needed that word shechar to tell me that I'm going to talk about, it tells me now 2 things, that it's something that makes you drunk, and I know from Nazir that it's a wine or a wine-based drink, and only wine per se in a liquid form is going to make you drunk. That's the assumption. So why didn't I start from shechar and all of that? I think because in the end, we don't really reject entirely what Reish Lakish says. We don't use the same pasuk that he starts with, because he starts with the earlier pasuk that doesn't use the word shechar, but we do ultimately get the answer from the same parsha, right, from Parshat Maaser Sheni. But now to maybe give you a little bit more, when we do this, we refine the question, and we learn things along the way. We get to learn things along the way. I think sometimes it's reasonable to say to argue that the Gemara will make these kinds of arguments not only to get to a final conclusion, but because the way we get to the final conclusion has its own value. So a couple of things that we learn along the way is that when we talk about achila, we talk about shtiyah, it's worth noting that we have to differentiate. It's worth noting that we have to differentiate. What's interesting, Bichlal, about this whole discussion is, we have, I think, arguably, right, we have a parallel, let's say, in English for eating. So if I say, I'm going to eat dinner, for example, no one would think that that doesn't necessarily include drinking. On the other hand, if I said, did you eat something? And the only thing you had was something to drink, you'd probably respond by saying, I drank something. So there's a language question here. When we talk about eating, do we mean generally consuming things through our mouths and through our digestive systems? That would include both eating and drinking. Or is it really just eating? And I think you see this also, and so what you see from the discussion is we have this, we have a kind of ambiguity from the Torah itself, that achila and shtiyah are not necessarily the same. And the other thing I'll point out in context of Yom Kippur, which we mentioned when we were learning the Mishnah, is despite the fact that shtiyah is bichlal achila, Li'inyan Isur, and also Li'inyan now, I understand, for finding a basis in the Pasuk, but nonetheless, they have different shiurim. So they're not identical, right? The shiur for drinking is not the same shiur as eating. And having a chatzi shiur of food and a chatzi shiur of shtiyah, of drinking, they're not mitztaref. You're only chayav if you eat or drink a shiur, respectively, of eating and drinking. So I don't think I'm saying anything clearly enough, but these differences, these fine differences are worth, I think, are worth pointing out. I think that's the point of the Gemara. So I don't know if that answered your question 100%, but I do think it's a certain approach of the Gemara that I'm going, two things. One, I'm making two arguments. One is I'm going to start with the earliest known approach, just chronologically, but that approach itself also seems to be based on what seems to be the most simple understanding. The simplest understanding would be the way Reish Lakish points it out. So I can pick that understanding apart and I can refine it, therefore refine it, but it's a good place to start, I think, and I think that works in our sugya. But right, actually, we didn't finish this whole thing. So now I think we have enough. We'll finish up till the end of this part of the sugya. This part we did look at. The next part the Gemara says, "V'tirosh chamrahu." So after all of this, what have I proven? I've just proven, based on the word shechar, that shechar is wine, and the Torah says that you can eat it. So I understand that shtiyah is bichlal achila. But now I'm going back to the first pasuk of Reish Lakish, where the Torah talks about tiroshcha. So the Gemara says, "V'tirosh chamrahu." Is it true that tirosh is wine? That was the assumption of Reish Lakish, and I didn't challenge that assumption. I just challenged whether or not wine is something that has to be drunk, or maybe I can also just eat it with something. So, but I'm now challenging the basic definition of the word tirosh. Is tirosh in fact wine? I learn in a Braita, this is from the Tosefta, Hanoder mina tirosh asur b'chol minei mitika umutar b'yayin. If somebody makes a neder that they will not consume tirosh, then they're not allowed to eat any kind of sweet thing. Really, it means any kind of sweet fruits, but they are allowed to drink wine, right? So if tirosh is wine, then this Braita doesn't make any sense. How can it be that you're noder mina tirosh, but you're allowed to drink wine? So presumably tirosh doesn't mean wine. What does tirosh mean in this Braita?
There's something sweet. Grape juice, presumably.
Well, it means actually not even juice. It means sweet fruits, right? And Rashi says, it's new, in other words, new sweet fruits like apples or grapes. Mutar b'yayin ben arba'im. You're allowed to have yayin that's ben arba'im. I think I maybe didn't say this right last time. I mentioned so ben arba'im, meaning the wine itself is 40 days old. That's the earliest that wine can be used as l'chatchila, as yayin on the mizbeach, as a misuch on the mizbeach. And so 40 days presumably is enough to make it wine. That is, it's an early stage of the fermentation process. After 40 days, it becomes wine. So in other words, you're allowed to drink if you say, I'm not going to consume any, right? Like any tirosh is asur to me. You're allowed to drink wine that's 40 days old. You're allowed, meaning you're allowed to drink wine, as we understand it, because tirosh in this context means, as you say, it means like sweet fruit. So that's a question, bichlal, which would relate back to Reish Lakish using this pasuk of the tiroshcha. How do I understand that tirosh means wine? And just a moment ago, then I also said shechar is yayin, and that seems then to be following up on this pasuk, the previous pasuk that uses tirosh, and it's all based on the idea that tirosh itself is wine. But then the Gemara, so the Gemara swings this way and says, I have a proof that tirosh is not wine, and now we're going to swing the other way. The lav chamrahu, and is it not wine? Vaktiv tirosh yinovev betulot. I have a pasuk that says tirosh yinovev betulot, and what does that mean? Rashi says tirosh yinovev betulot ze yayin tov shehu mishaker et ha'adam legalot sitrei libo ha'tumim kivtula. This word yinovev, I think last week I just used the translation of flourishing, like hanava of a plant, right? That it flowers, that it flourishes. It's an interesting thing when you look through Rishonim on the root of the word. It's also related to the word niv, like borei niv sfatayim, like expression of the lips, and those two concepts actually seem to be related. This idea of growing and flourishing and expression of, and verbal expression. But so the way you can understand tirosh yinovev betulot is that wine will make even betulot, who stereotypically would be people who were shy or people who are not open to speaking out that much, it would make them speak. Wine would make them speak. It would make them, something come out of them. And what is that? So how does that prove that tirosh is wine? Because that's how we understand tirosh in this context. that drinking wine, Yinove betulot, is that which will make even betulot to speak. And this is more or less what Rashi's saying. And Tirosh Yinove betulot, ze yayin tov shu mishaker adam. Right, this is good wine that makes a person drunk. Legalot sitre libo ha'atumim kivtula, ha'atumim kivtula. Rashi uses betula here in a more metaphorical way. Yinove betulot doesn't mean to make virgins speak. It means to make speak people who are closed or things that are closed like a virgin is closed. But either way, that's what it means. So so the Gemara answers, Davar haba mina tirosh yinove betulot. So what does it mean? That something that comes from tirosh. So what do we mean? A moment ago, I explained tirosh means fresh fruit, sweet fruit. And here it says tirosh yinove betulot. It sounds like it means that tirosh means wine. Here it meant fruit and not wine. Here it means wine and apparently not fruit. So the Gemara answers no. In this context, v'tirosh yinove betulot, you should understand that it also means fruit. It means grapes. And when it says tirosh, it means that which comes from tirosh, that which comes from fresh grapes, which is wine, yinove betulot. That so means tirosh itself doesn't mean wine. It means grapes that are the main ingredient of wine. Right. So that's how the Gemara wants to reconcile these two sources. Rashi says, "Abamina tirosh mina anavim," that which comes from tirosh, from anavim, as we understood from the Braita. V'hachika makra. This is how I understand the pasuk. Anavim yotziu lachem davar asher yinove betulot. The grapes will produce something for you, aka wine. That is wine. And that wine is what will open up the closed. So the Gemara pushes back. V'haktiv, the tiroshi kavecha yifrotzu. I have another pasuk, and this is from I think it's from Yirmiyahu, right? No, from Mishlei. Let me open this up. I'll show you. Gimel Yud. V'imalu asamecha sava, v'tiroshi kavecha yifrotzu. Right. So this is saying if you follow my instruction, like the previous pasuk says, kabed et Hashem mehonecha, you should honor God more than your property, or that which you own, and more than the first of all of your harvest. And if you do, then v'imalu asamecha sabach, the tirosh yikavecha yifrotzu. So the reward that you would get, or either the reward or the natural outcome of following these instructions, then that would mean that your storehouses of food will become filled to satiety, and tirosh, which we would understand in this context to mean wine, they would burst forth from your yekev, right? And the yekev is the pit in the winery where after you crush the grapes, that's where the juice flows and that's where it becomes wine. So the bracha here is that wine is going to burst forth from your yekev, because the yekev is specifically the place where the wine is in the winery. So this pasuk indicates, it seems to indicate clearly that tirosh is wine. It's not that which it's not that which comes from well, the Gemara is going to answer that, but tirosh here seems to mean wine, because tirosh is wine is what you have in a yekev. So what would burst forth from it? What would burst forth from a yekev? It would have to be wine. Oh, I did all that without showing you the screen, so I apologize. But okay, you get the idea. Here we go. So Gemara says, okay, I can still say, Davar habami natirosh yikavechi yifrotzu. I'll say the same thing that I said before. Here, tirosh doesn't mean wine. It means that which comes from grapes, which is wine, that will burst forth from your yekev. So then I'm going to bring another pasuk. V'haktiv znut v'yayin v'tirosh yikach lev. That harlotry and wine and tirosh will take the heart. Right? This is from Hosea. So what do I see? Here, it seems to be then even more explicit. I can't say, here I have the word yayin and tirosh in the same pasuk. So it tells me, on the one hand, you might argue that yayin and tirosh are not the same thing. And they're not. But yayin and tirosh are both things that take the heart, right? In other words, so presumably it means in this context, those are things for which one, gets drunk, that you lose your own sensibility. So on the one hand, it tells me that tirosh and yayin are not identical, but on the other hand, I can't say that tirosh refers to that which comes from grapes, which is wine. In other words, until now, I wanted to say tirosh meant fresh grapes, and then whenever I thought it meant wine, I wanted to argue that it means that which comes from fresh grapes is wine. But I can't say that here. So what, in fact, does tirosh mean in this context? Or here, Rashi, as usual, put it a little bit more succinctly. The haktiv znut v'yayin v'tirosh yikach lev. Until now, I want to say that tirosh means grapes, but achilat anavim eina meshakeret. We know that tirosh here can't refer simply to grapes, because eating grapes alone is not going to make you drunk. It's not going to be lokeach lev. Ela, tekule alma tirosh. So what does tirosh in fact mean there? Before you understand that it means is that there's wine, and tirosh would be like the new wine. It would be like, I guess, like the Beaujolais of wine. That is, yayin and tirosh they're both wine. But what it proves is tirosh has to be wine. It can't refer simply to grapes that make wine. And so therefore, I have this problem, because I still have the Braita that says Hanoder meli tirosh is mutar b'yayin. right? That you could be noder from tirosh, but then you're still allowed to drink wine. So in the Braita, tirosh is not wine. But here I've proven from in Tanakh that tirosh must mean wine. So how do I reconcile the two? So Ela de Kule Alma Tirosh Chamrahu. So the Gemara says, okay, in reality, everybody holds that tirosh is in fact wine. However, what? Uvinidarim halach achar lashon b'nei adam. When it comes to making a neder, this is I introduced this concept last week. When I make a neder, I'm not going after what the strict definition, like the dictionary definition of the word is, or in this case, what the Tanakhic the definition of the word is. When I make a neder, I'm going after the way people speak. That's what Zema Shekoveh. That's what determines the meaning of the neder. So the idea is that Nidarim Allah Achar B'nei Adam, and as Rashi says, Vein Darkan Mikrot Et Yayin Tirosh. It's not the way of people to call wine tirosh. So if somebody says, Ani noder min hatirosh, we understand they're not talking about wine. It doesn't matter that tirosh in Tanakh means wine. It doesn't even matter, let's say, even in the time of the Mishnah, that tirosh meant wine maybe in a literary sense. What matters is what the person said when they were making the neder. That indicates what his intention is. So his intention is clearly to be noder from fresh fruit. When he says tirosh, he's clearly not talking about wine, and that's why he's permitted to have wine. All right. So now the last part of the Gemara here is just like a drasha. Why? So why in this pasuk of Hosea, or not maybe it could be referring to the pasuk of Hosea, or it could just be in general. Why do we have two terms for wine? Why in Tanakh do we call it both yayin and tirosh? V'mai kari le yayin, v'mai kari le tirosh. Why should I call it wine? Why should yayin? And why should I call it tirosh? Yayin shemevi yelala la'olam. We call it wine because it brings like crying out in the world, like. Rashi explains, Al Yedei Hayayin Rav Haniyuf Puranut Ba'al Olam. Through wine, then licentiousness becomes great, and it brings punishments to the world. And what's the relationship between yayin and yilala? Yayin lashon ta'aniya, the yilala, right? So like from Echa, where it talks about ta'aniya va'aniya. It's a lashon of avelut, which seems to be connected to the idea of crying out as a mourner. So it's a very subtle kind of drasha that the word yayin, Rashi says, is related to the word aniyah, which is related to this idea of crying out. So my kari le yayin shemevi yalala la'olam. And why is it called tirosh? Shekol hamitgarebo na'aseh rash. Anyone who contends with wine or becomes tempted by wine will become a poor person. They become a rash. It makes them a rash. So on that, the Gemara ends off with this other little drush. Rav Kahana Rami. So Rav Kahana threw together these two sources, Ktiv Tirosh, the Karinan Tirosh, right? So here it's written Tirosh, it's written Tirash. In other words, it's written Chaser, and that's in the bracha that's given to Yaakov, right? Yitain lecha Elokim yital hashamayim u'mishmanei haaretz v'rov dagan v'tirosh. That's in the bracha that Yaakov, as it were, stole from Esav. It's written tirash, but we read it tirosh. Zacha na'asa rosh. So if he's zocheh, he becomes the head. Lo zacha, but if he's not zocheh, na'aseh rash.
Na'aseh rash.
Right, he becomes a rash. He becomes.
There's a problem with the aleph.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
No. Okay, but you know that the Gemara elsewhere, like in the beginning of Sukkah and other places, this was a discussion in the Gemara about yesh aim l'mikra or yesh aim l'masorah. That is, do I base my understanding on the mikra, the way the word is written, or do I base it on the masorah, which is how it's pronounced? And so here, what it's saying is, it's relying on both. That is, it's saying it's written in a certain way, so that would indicate Rash, but we pronounce it Rosh, so it has this dual meaning. Both meanings are implanted in the word. It's
ambivalent.
Well, not ambivalent, but right, but dual. Right, it's dual. It has both meanings. It contains both meanings. I'll say something about that in a second. Let's just read to the end of this part. Rava also, in a similar way, threw together two sources, meaning again, it's really the same pasuk or the same word that you can read in two ways. Ktiv Yishmach Yesh Lomar. You'll see this is Zelo Pashut how we should vocalize the Gemara here, but this, for our purposes, will start like this. It's written Yishmach, the Karinan Yisamach, but I read it with a sin. It makes you happy. Zacha misamcho, lo zacha mishamemo. So this is from it's a reference to the pasuk Yain Yisamach Levav Enosh. Right? So wine, the simple understanding is that wine makes the heart of a person happy. So what does it mean, ktiv? What's the ktiv here? So presumably the way you would understand this, either you read it like I said, like you read it like it's a shin, yishamach, and then it's more like the word shimamon, like shmama, like something that's desolate. But the way we read it, the way we pronounce it is yisamach, that it makes you happy. So zacha misamcho, lo zacha mishamemo. Hainu dama rava chamra v'rechani pikachin or pikchin, that wine and things which smell good are Rashi says pikchin pikchoni asauni pikeach. That wine, so the point of what Rava is saying is that Rava, when he drank wine, it made him smarter, it made him more aware, right? So wine and let's say things that either smell good or sharp smelling things would actually waken him up. So what does it mean in this context? That there are two possible outcomes when you drink wine. If you drink it, like if you can't handle your liquor and you get drunk, it's going to lead to desolation. But if you drink it well, you drink it properly, then it's misamech. Then it makes you happy.
A technical question. The Gemara is written without vowels.
Yes.
Nikud.
Right.
You put in the Nikud, but how would you understand this if you don't have the Nikud? It's Ktiv.
So
because you have twice the same. You
right.
did the difference because you put you added the Nikud. The Rav Steinsaltz also adds the Nikud, but in the
right. How do you do it without? So what I want to tell you is Zelo Pashut, and of course I'm basing myself on on Parshanim, but in principle I should do this now, but I'm going to leave it to next time. I found really interesting discussions, a couple of interesting discussions of this particular Gemara and how to understand it. And it turns out there are other girsaot in the Gemara itself. But as I said to Michael, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. And I don't want to take the time now in the last few minutes. Let's start from here next time, and I'll show you. It helps to address your question. The way it's written in the Gemara is obscure. In other words, we understand what Rava is trying to say, but the question is, how is he reading this pasuk? Is he reading it the way I just read it, like Yishmach and Yisamach? And even if he reads it Yishmach, so Shamach is not really a word, but the Chet and the Hey are mitchafot, right? That happens, and there are many, many examples of that. In fact, in the other shiur that I give in Sofrut, there's a whole discussion about that because they're also mitchafot in writing. That sometimes a Hey is a Chet and sometimes a Chet is a Hey. We have other examples of that. But if you want, you can look in this pasuk. Here, I put the references here. If you look in the, I didn't bring down the whole text, but if you look in the Diktukei Sofrim on the Gemara here, the Diktukei Sofrim, which I've brought in before, is really the earliest critical edition of the Gemara. It was done in the mid-19th century it was based on taking the popular edition of the Gemara, the Vilna Shas, and comparing it to what had been a recently discovered manuscript, the Ketav Yad Minchen, right, the Ketav Yad from Munich, which turned out to be like the oldest, almost complete manuscript of the Talmud Bavli. And this fellow,
there is no Nikud in the manuscript, or do they sometimes add a Nikud just to clear up things? So
I don't think so, and I'm not enough of an expert. I have looked in manuscripts, but what I look at mainly, I look at, so you're familiar with, right, the website of
yes, Achiga Sinan, yes.
Yeah, we have that. So what preceded what preceded that by whatever, like 150 years, was the Diktukei Sofrim, where this fellow Rabinovich, who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham, he published Ketav Yad Minchen side by he took every line from the Talmud Bavli where there's a variation in Ketav Yad Minchen and put it side by side, and then in his notes, which he had copious notes, he would also compare to other known manuscripts and other known printings, and also the way the Gemara would be quoted in different Gaonim and Rishonim, which would also reflect other Girsaot. So he talks a lot about this Gemara, and also the Minchat Shai on this pasuk of Yain Yisamach Levav Enosh, which is in Tehillim. We all know it from it's the Shir Shel Yom of Rosh Chodesh. We say Yain Yisamach Levav Enosh. The Minchat Shai on that pasuk in Tehillim, Kuf Daled pasuk Tetvav, he also has a long discussion about it. And so, B'li Neder, next time we'll start from there. So this part of the Gemara, of course, it's a digression, because the main thing, the whole thing that I really wanted to prove was that Shtiyah is Bichlal Achilah. Therefore, even though the Mishnah lists 6 Inuyim, there are only really 5 Inuyim, because Achilah and Shtiyah are the same Inui, and therefore I only need 5 Psukim as a basis. And the last thing I want to say about that, which we mentioned before, but bear in mind that maybe this whole sugya, this whole part of the sugya that we did, seems to indicate that all of the inuyim are dioraita. Otherwise, why would I care so much about whether they're 5 psukim or not 5 psukim? If the only inuyim that are dioraita are achilah v'shtiyah, so then all the other psukim I don't need them. So what does it mean that the hani inuyim keneged me, right? So I say they're in correspondence to these 5 psukim, and because I go out of my way to show that I only need 5 psukim, it seems to indicate that it's important for me to show that the inuyim are really dioraita. And this goes contrary to the way we had been assuming until now, that only achilah and shtiyah are dioraita, and the other ones are d'Rabbanan. So that's an issue that we'll get into the Rishonim. There's a machloket Rishonim, but we'll talk about it. But I'm making a mental note to myself. I do want to digress on this a little bit next time about exactly this question: how you read the Gemara. Are there other readings in the Gemara, and how do I understand that from this pasuk? So I think we'll stop here. We end up doing a whole hour and or virtually an hour and a half, even though Michael and I are both tired, and probably Paul is tired too. So take it easy. Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Okay. Toda rabba. Bye bye.
Bye bye.